All right, so why don't we start with coping with anxiety? Um, Anxiety, which is generalized fear, it's an emotion. And we're not just talking about anxiety, we're talking about maybe apathy or melancholy or sadness, or anger, whatever you're experiencing, all the emotions that you're experiencing. For you to understand how can you make them, how do you deal with them in a productive way, which will make them actually be reduced in severity if they're negative emotions, you need to know a little bit about how emotions work. And then we're going to talk about in this particular situation how you can apply it and how you can contain the anxiety to open up the space for the self-development. Okay, so good news and bad news is basically we are wired in the same way as all other primates in terms of our emotions. They all, from this little mouse down here to our closest primate cousins, chimpanzees, we all have same emotional circuits. And so what are emotions for? Because if you know what emotions are for, you'll know how emotion will go away. Emotion is there to signal to you where you stand in relation to some goal that you have. And this is very important. The goal part is very important here to know, because emotion is always in relation to goals. So if you're experiencing anxiety, it will always be in relation to a set of goals. The second thing is that, and yeah, there are signals to self and others, but second thing is that they provide an incentive for action. So the way that I would encourage you to think of it is, emotion wants you to do something. You just need to know what it wants you to do. And once you do it, it will go away. Okay? So now, what does this mean in terms of goals? So if you look at this circle of emotions, there's a lot of circles of emotions. I want you to look at this inner circle, and I'm just gonna pick 4, which I think are the most basic emotions: happiness, anger, sadness, and fear. And what you'll notice is that all 4 will be in relation to a goal. So anger is when there's an obstacle to your goal, fear is when there's some sort of threat to your goal, sadness is the loss of a goal, and happiness when you're approaching the goal. And the one that we're going to deal with here is fear, because it's threat to your goal. Now, why has this situation created so much anxiety? Because the number of goals which are threatened by this particular situation in which we find ourselves is enormous. All goals that you have in your life, physical, emotional, social, professional, all of them are potentially threatened and at the same time. Okay, so now, whereas fear is a threat to a specific goal, what anxiety is a generalized fear. So basically, imagine just a lot of fears. If you put them all together, you will end up with a feeling of anxiety. So if you notice the feeling of anxiety, it kind of sends a signal to your body. It makes you restless, makes you heart beat faster. And these are all natural, as I'll tell you in a second, natural components of simply emotion of fear, except when there's a lot of goals which are threatened at the same time, it would generalize. And so very big part of helping anxiety be reduced is how to turn it, something that's very generalized anxiety, you don't really even know what you're exactly afraid of, into actual fear. So I am not going to go through this list of what anxiety, what fears do to you. One thing to keep in mind is this: primate action, the thing that we're wired to do, which is to fight or flight, or in a very, very terrible circumstances to freeze, doesn't help us as humans. So in any situation, let's say that in your work meeting and you have a colleague who is undermining you in some way, what your body, if they experience it as a threat to a professional goal, your body would suddenly get into this angry place, and suddenly you would it would mobilize for action, that you want to fight them, like you want to tackle your colleague down to the ground. But that actually wouldn't fulfill your goal. So the emotion wouldn't go, even if you were to tackle your colleague to the ground, your emotion wouldn't go away. Why? Because the goal that you have would be even further away from you than before. In the same way, if you are in a work meeting and somebody is insinuating that you might be let go or that your work is subpar, you might feel a great feeling of threat, and your body would mobilize in exactly the same way. So what I want you to keep in mind is that when you're experiencing symptoms of anxiety, which is that you might have a heartbeat that is going very hard, like very quickly, shortness of breath, restlessness, inability to sleep, all of those symptoms are perfectly normal responses that your body is giving to your thoughts about what is happening to you. So you're having a thought, oh my, you're having a thought about the situation, and your body would basically put all of these things into action to protect you. But what we need to do as humans, we need to put a break to the automatic primate response so that we can actually address the goal, which would then make the fear reduce and the anxiety go away. So what does that mean? Non-human primates, so we're lucky because non-human primates, you see here, apes, they go from stimulus perception straight into action. So they see a threat, they see, let's say, an animal attacking their, in their cave, they have pile of food, and an animal is trying to take away their pile of food. They have an automatic single motivation, just survive, survive and reproduce. That's the motivation. And there's an automatic expression that would automatically spring into action. And what humans are lucky in that, given that it doesn't really help us spring into action in the way that primates do, because our goals are more complex and are not solved by attacking and by or simply running away. What we have is a third step here. You see this cognitive appraisal, which is the kind of how you perceive the situation, how you shape your thought around the situation, how you interpret it. So what is really important about this is that you'll see something happen, and then you are going to interpret it, and then you go into action. And this action, you get to choose how you're going to express your emotion, right? And also, you can have multiple motivations. So, and these motivations are going to shape your perception of the situation. So what do I mean by that? So whenever there's a big crisis, for example, let's say the crisis that we're in now, depending on how you interpret it, you would feel a different kind of emotion. So for example, a person who interprets the current situation as an obstacle, they would be angry a lot, right? So they might be angry at politicians, they might be angry at the virus, they might be angry at the animals that they feel like they might be angry at the whole political system, they might be angry at all sorts of people, right? So why are they angry? Because what they're perceiving in the situation is the obstacles to the goals that they've had. Now, how about a person who, instead of when they watch the crisis, they look at the body count of all the people who are dying and their families, the losses they've experienced? They would feel sad, because what you would, by interpreting it as this enormous loss, you would focus on the loss, and therefore the experience would be of sadness. If you focus on the threat to you and to your close ones and to the other people, it would be fear. And now you might think, well, the fourth one that we were dealing with is happiness, and who on earth would be happy in this situation? Well, it's not quite happy, as much as if you interpret the situation as an opportunity to contribute to your community and to the world in some unique way, or in a way that you haven't anticipated, that you can contribute to your neighbor, to whoever it is that you can provide some support, you could actually experience that as a sense of, okay, I had the goal to contribute to, do something good for my neighbor, and as a consequence, I'd feel happy that I have done that. So you see that we have the same crisis, the same situation happening, we have the same body count, the same level of threat, but each person, depending on the goals that they have and how these goals make them interpret each of these situations, they suddenly have a different emotion. So the way that you look at the situation is a powerful lever that can lever your emotions from one emotion to another. And it will be, as we'll see, controlled by the motivations and the goals you set for yourself. Okay. Now, one more thing before I forget. You notice this little blue dot I'm putting here. It means that it's a choice point, that unlike primates, we can choose how to interpret things. So we can choose the interpretation, and we can also choose which goal, which motivation we're going to pick as our goal. So you can choose to see the threat, you can choose to see the obstacle, or you can choose to see the ways to contribute. And this will determine what your emotion is. Now, So if you want to cope with the negative emotion, you need to know when it's going to stop. And now that you know what emotion is, it's sort of a signal about some sort of goal, and it demands you to do something. You need to know that negative emotion for you will stop when the signal that you're receiving has been received accurately and at the actionable level of detail. That means that it's not something like, I could die. So what about, so somebody could say, yeah, I got the signal, I could die. So what about that? Well, that's not at the actionable level of the detail. The idea is that given that I can die from this, or given that the family member can die from it, what it is that I can do about it. Okay, so that's actionable level of detail. And then you need to have a credible action plan, and it needs to be implemented, right? So the credible action plan needs to start to be implemented for this negative emotion to go away, okay? Now, so the threat in this case that we're experiencing is very unique. First, to most of us who are not epidemiologists and you're not doctors, it's invisible, it's unbounded, and it's unfightable. So you can do a lot of things, but you can't do anything to the virus itself. You can do things by your actions, but the world in which we live is not microscopic. It's the world which we usually live in. So this threat could be experienced as completely unbounded, which is what would be causing us to have the stress response in which we have inability to sleep, or restlessness, or invasive thoughts. You know, often people will think of just one thing that they could do. I think the whole obsession with buying just one item like toilet paper or something has to do with, I want to do something, right? So instead of trying to figure out all the goals that are for you, you figure out just like one goal that has been suggested by somebody else that's potentially important, and then being very obsessive, hoarding that particular resource. Obsessive news watching, feeling melancholy and fatigue, and experiencing distractions and addictions. There is a very famous stress trauma researcher and medical doctor, Maja Djikic, and he says something very interesting about trauma. So under what conditions will stressful situations traumatize us? And he says something like, it will traumatize you when you can't enact a proper defense response. So this is why it's so important for us to be able to identify exactly the goals that are being threatened, and then go through our response. Because in the going through the response, we will be able to not feel traumatized as a result of experiencing something at this scale.